I want to start with a thank you to Rabbi Fahi and to Chazak and Safra Synagogue for allowing me to be part of your wonderful organization for the past number of years. But I want to start with an embarrassing story that happened to me many years ago that I've never told before. I don't think at this Bet Knesset or any Bet Knesset actually. I'm going to use it as the mashal to bring out a nimshal as well. This story goes back, my dear friends, way over 30 years. I was a volunteer on kibbutz on my year in Israel before attending university in England. I was on a year course, and part of the year course was we did yeshiva, and the women went to seminary, and we also worked on a kibbutz. And lo and behold, the job I was given on kibbutz was to work in the kitchen. And this was a very large kibbutz with a very large kitchen. And as a Sephardi boy growing up, I'd never stepped foot in the kitchen, I'm embarrassed to tell you. And I had one job one day, because the kibbutz, back in 1991, made their own mayonnaise. And I'd never seen mayonnaise being made before. And we're dealing with 1,000 people on the kibbutz, and they took out the largest pot I'd ever seen in my entire life. It was humongous. And it was a mixer. And they had this large contraption that would lower inside and would mix the contents of this humongous pot. And they cracked inside this pot, 1,000 eggs. I can't even tell you how many. So many eggs, because it's all egg whites, and oil, so much oil. And literally, this pot could hold like a grown man. What a man will do inside a pot, I don't know. But let's say they could take a bath inside it. And they said, Lawrence, you have one job. Your one job is to make sure that none of the mayonnaise we're making is going to go anywhere. It's got to stay in the pot. Well, I said, how am I going to do that? He said, we're going to take a sheet. And we're going to cover, like a bed sheet. We're going to cover the outside of the pot with this bed sheet. Your job is to watch to make sure that no mayonnaise comes out. Just watch the sheet. Do nothing else. Watch the sheet. And so I watched the sheet. I'm there in this massive kitchen, watching this massive pot, mixing and mixing and mixing. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. My friends, it's a very boring job. And my ADD at 19 years old was very, very high. Eventually my friends came in, and I saw them come over, and they started to schmooze with me. And so I left my post for just a few minutes. And I walked to the side of this humongous kitchen and left the mayonnaise being mixed by this massive mixer. Suddenly, I heard a scream behind me. And all the women on the kibbutz had descended, that were in the kitchen, on this pot. Why? Because the sheet had slowly, because of the pressure, I think, gone inside the pot. And it wrapped around the mixing part. And was now in the process of whipping out all of this mayonnaise inside the pot, so much that you couldn't even get close to the pot, because anyone tried to get close got a big wallop of mayonnaise on their face and on their clothing. Over this kitchen, there were 1,000 eggs worth and oil of mayonnaise that had been flicked out from this whipping sheet over the entire kitchen. You couldn't get close. Screaming, shouting. Eventually, I managed to make my way through, covered in mayonnaise, to this, those horror movies, there's Frankenstein's switch that goes up and down. It turns off all the electricity in the entire kibbutz, I think. And I turned it down. And the mixer came to a slow stop. And the sheet that had wrapped around the mixing part had stopped as well. There wasn't a drop of mayonnaise left inside. It was now decorating the entire kitchen. And there was that moment of silence when you look up and look around, and there were 30 or 40 faces of very angry men and women who would look at me like this. except it was funny because they were all covered in mayonnaise. They did punish me. I had to actually clean the entire kitchen with this broom. And by the way, it's oil. So you have to use soap, and the rest of the day I was scrubbing away. The next day, they had to make mayonnaise. I wonder why. And they said, you know what, Lawrence, you sit this one out. We'll find someone else. So my friend got the job, and he'd heard about the story. He looked at me and said, what should I do? And I said, watch the sheet. That's all you have to do. Friends, it's a perfect mashal, and here comes the nimshal. There's one thing we need to do as Jewish people today, 2024, 5784, moving into 5785. More about that later on. We've got to watch the sheet to make sure there isn't a breakthrough, and that sheet is machloket. Fighting. Fighting is going to be the thing that keeps us where we are. It's keeping us in galut. It's keeping us tightly in exile. This is something the rabbis have told us again and again and again. From the days of the Torah to the days of the Gemara to the Rishonim Acharonim, they all are unanimous on one thing. And that is, stay away from machloket. We are in galut now because we're not treating each other well. That's our sheet. That's what we've got to keep our eyes on. Keep your eyes focused on this one thing. If we can work out machloket, you know, the Shlach HaKadosh says the word machloket is designed perfectly to describe what fighting machloket actually is. He says the first letter is a mem, and a mem, if you see in the Torah, it's got a little opening, tiny little opening. But if you let the fight in the machlok continue, it becomes a chet. That's the next letter. And it's got a bigger opening at the bottom. And if you don't fix it when it gets that bigger opening, you're going to end up with a lamed and a kuf, and the lamed goes up and the kuf goes down. It's got big legs. It's going to start spreading, and eventually, if you don't fix it by then, says the Shlach Kadosh, it becomes a taf, the final letter of machloket, and that is steady, and it's there, and it ain't moving anywhere. On its 2 feet, and will last for years, decades, maybe even centuries, I don't even know. We've got to work on this one area. We've got to be mevater. We have to let it go. Shlomo Melech tells us in Mishlei, Poter mayim reshid madon, like water streaming through a breach. That is the beginning of all dispute. Why does he use such an unusual metaphor? And the rabbis tell us because Shlomo Melech was telling us when machloket comes in, Shlomo Melech saw a lot of machloket. In his life, in his father's life, he knew what he was dealing with. It starts off with a little trickle of water. It starts to make its way through the mud. And then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and eventually you end up madon. The word madon, says the Gemara, has the gematria of 100. 100. And the Gemara then says, that is the 100 punishments you get for being involved in machloket, in fighting. That's what you're going to get. That's what you need to work on. I must tell you an unbelievable story I read a number of weeks ago. And I can believe the story because I've heard many similar type stories about the rabbi I'm about to tell you. The story is about the stapler Gaon, who really was a Gaon. By the way, if you're known in Jewish history as the genius, you're a genius. If you're known in history as the Rasha, I'd start to fix your ways. Right, that's the entire Jewish people. There's a lot of smart Jews out there. If you're known as the genius one, you can only imagine. And so the story is told of a older rabbi who was working with young children. He wanted to bring these children to see the stapler, to get the bracha. And the stapler at this point was very old, deaf, partially blind. If you see it, there's pictures and drawings of him holding sfarim right to his face like this, right, because he could barely see. And people have to write messages down on paper in order to get an answer because he couldn't hear what they were saying. And so this Rebbe went with his young kids. Listen to this unbelievable story. And he walks in, and each one of the boys goes, and the stapler's learning. He says, bracha, bracha, you know. And the kids leave, and the man is about to leave. And the stapler says, 1 second. He says, come here. He goes, what's your name? He goes, my name? My name is Yankel. And he says, then please tell me, why the name on your forehead says Shlomo. He says, I'm sorry. He says, on your forehead, the name Shlomo. Was your father Shlomo? He goes, no, my father was, I think, David. Grandfather? No. Cut. Nothing at all. But this is a certain chokhmah that you can read a person's forehead. I always say to my wife, the older I get, the more creases I get over here. It's like a whole script. But there's a certain power, chokhmat partzuf. There's a chapter of the Zohar that someone showed me that describes the power of understanding a person. Look at their metzach, their forehead. Okay. So the man said, I don't understand. It's not my name and nor my family's name. I have no idea. And then he thought about it and says, there's one event that happened to me that does involve someone with the name Shlomo. And what was it? He says, before I was a Rebbe working with kids many, many years ago, I was a fundraiser. And I used to travel from country to country, collecting funds for a yeshiva. And I went to one country once. And I started asking people for money. And in this community, they said, we can't give you money until the president of the community says we can. And his name is President Schlomo. So I had to go find him. And I found President Schlomo. And I went to his home, and I sat down. And he says, I have a very sharp tongue and a terrible sense of humor. And I made a comment which really offended him. And no matter how much I apologized, he would not listen. He was so upset. He said, no one in my community is going to give you a penny. Leave the community now. And he said, that's exactly what happened. I tried. I went to one Bet Knesset, another Bet Knesset. It wasn't working. Everyone says, President Schlomo said not to give any money. President Schlomo said not to give any money. You're not getting any money. I said, this is ridiculous. I had to leave the city penniless. It was very, very difficult for one stupid mistake that I made, offending this man. I went to another community, and I went to the Bet Knesset, and I had more tzlacha. I started to collect funds. And then I met with a certain man. He said, come to my home. And he wrote me out a check for $500, which back then was a lot of money. And while I was there with this man, he got a phone call. And it was his brother-in-law, who happened to be President Schlomo. And he says, by the way, there's going to be a man, I think he's coming to your community, ask for money. Don't give him anything. And the man looked at me and said, I'm so sorry. President Schlomo says, he took the check and he ripped it up. And that was the end of it. I was devastated. I came all this way collecting money, my entire parnassah, the yeshiva I was collecting for was all done. I felt so bad, so humiliated. I went to the Bet Knesset the next day, not to collect money, just to pray before I went home. And I'd heard that President Schlomo had died. And he died, we figured out the time, pretty much the moment he made that phone call and the check was ripped up. And the stipler says, now I understand. He says, let me tell you something. You were meant to die on that trip. This was meant to be your mitah. It was meant to finish right there. But you were humiliated and you were embarrassed and you didn't respond and you were willing to give up your pride and your honor. So Hashem took President Shlomo's life instead, who instigated machloket, and he gave you his remaining years. Here, you are Yankov, but in Shemayim, you are living out the years of President Schlomo. And that's what I see on your forehead. Can't make it up. There's so much to unpack in that story. So many lessons. First of all, the gadlut of great Rabbanim, at least lefachot. But one piece, machloket, what it can do, it ruins our lives, our communities. Rav Chaim Pelagi, Zechazal Levracha, says, I've seen several instances where any man, or woman, family, country, or city involved in machloket, both sides don't come out good. It's a lose-lose. I never talk about win-win. This is the lose-lose. I saw in my own eyes, he says, them smitten with their bodies, with their money, Rahman al-Islam. Some had wisdom taken away. They became foolish and sick. The reason we're in Galut now is because we don't have a Beit HaMikdash. The reason we have the Beit HaMikdash is because we didn't treat treat each other with kavod. That's what it was about, my dear friends. There is a beautiful, beautiful Gemara and Ben Ish Chai that talks about a minhag that we, the Jewish people, have. And the minhag is, and many of you do it, if you don't, you can start doing it, is we give our children brachot on Friday night. Have you seen this? We put our hands on the heads of our sons and our daughters. And by the way, you can do your grandchildren too, because according to the Torah, grandchildren are like children. And for some people that means paying for their yeshiva tuition as well. But we'll leave that aside for now. What is this minhag? It's an ancient minhag, my friends. It goes back to the times of the Torah. Times of the Torah. Where do we see it? We see Yaakov Avinu. He calls in his grandchildren, another proof you can bless the grandchildren, who were Menashe and Ephraim, and he gave them a bracha. And how did he do it? He put his hands on their heads. Remember the whole story? Right? Your kids come home, he flipped it, boop, 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 right? Because it should have been like this, but he wanted to flip it, and Yosef said, no, Abba, you got it wrong. It's better. No, I know what I'm doing. This one needs the right hand, this one needs the left hand. They have different missions, and that involves different powers and abilities. And so we do the same thing. Why do we put our hands on the head? So the Ben Ish Chai says, because we give them the bracha of Kohanim, Bechat Kohanim, which may not have to be a Kohen, you don't need to be a Kohen, you do it anyway. You put your hand on the head, and there are 15 words in Bechat Kohanim, and there are 15 joints in the hand, including the wrist. And so that hand has got 15 joints, comes keneged, the 15 words, says the Ben Ish Chai, Bechat Kohanim, put your hand on the head, and you give a bracha. Very nice. By the way, as a side point, why do we bless our kids? If they're girls, to be like Sarah, Rivka, Rachel and Leah, and if they're boys, they should be like Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, I don't know, Yosef, maybe Moshe, no. Why Menashe and Ephraim? Why do we bless our girls to be like the Imaot, and our boys to be like Menashe and Ephraim? So there's a very deep lesson of it. I'll just mention it, because it is important. Friends, Menashe and Ephraim were unique, that they were stuck in Egypt, in Mitzrayim, without their cousins and without their uncles. They were trapped. And they were hanging out in the Nile with all the other kids, getting involved in who knows what. And yet they stayed strong in their faith. They were able to keep it together and follow the path of their father Yosef, who was by himself. And they worked together with him in his mission, which is why they were translating, actually, between Paro and Yosef and the brothers when he was speaking Egyptian. They stayed faithful. We say to our kids, we want you to be like them. Be like the perfect Jewish boys of Jewish history. Although you're surrounded by so many temptations, things happening in the malls, things happening in the vacation place, you're going to stick with your faith. And that is the perfect bracha. Why do we do this on Friday night? Was that bracha originally on Friday night when Yaakov gave the bracha? I don't know. You know why? Because of machloket. Because during the week, you probably shouted at your kids, and you argue, and you may have chas v'chalila cursed them out, and maybe they cursed you out. So you know what you're going to do? On Friday, on Shabbat, which is a time of Shalom, you're going to make peace with your kids and your grandkids. So people say to me, at what point do I stop giving a bracha to my kids? And I'm like, why would you stop giving a bracha? The day you stop fighting with your kids is the day you stop. Do you still fight with your kids? Yeah, then give a bracha. But my kids like 40, 50, 80, I don't care. Shabbat is the time for Shalom. And the Ben Ish Chai says that's the most important trait you can have, is to avoid machloket on Shabbat more than anything else. If you want to pick one day not to fight, because 7 days a week's tough, right? We need to fight. We got to vent, get it out of the system. At least choose Shabbat. Try to keep peace from when the lights are lit to the Havdalah candle is lit. Keep Shalom in your home. And it's tough because kids are annoying and husbands are annoying. I get it. But that's the 25 hours Hashem expects of us. And that's why we give a bracha Friday nights. So you make peace, says the Ben Ish Chai, with the kids that you fought with all week. Give them a bracha, you kiss them, you make up once a week. So, so important. The Gemara has a very, very weird story, which I happen to love and have taught many times. The Gemara in Brachot talks about a man who got into a fight with his wife and spends the night in anyone know? Cemetery. And while he's in the cemetery, the Gemara in Brachot, by the way, the Gemara is going to try to figure out whether people who have left this world or are aware of what's happening in this world. If people have died, are they aware of what's happening in this world? It's a great question. So the Gemara has a lengthy discussion. The sad part is the Gemara does not give a conclusion and it doesn't side one way or the other. And you can pick up at any point of the discussion and be like, yes, they are aware, or no, they're not aware. Okay, the later commentators, remember the Gemara, the back of the Gemara, the Maharsha, says some people are aware, most people are not aware. Okay, we'll leave that aside. Depends who the person is. But that's not what I'm telling you the story. So the story is this man goes to the cemetery and he spends the night in the cemetery. And he hears the spirits, says the Gemara, having a discussion one with another. And it's the spirits of two young girls who had died young. And they got into a whole discussion, an argument about what's going to come to the world. Is there going to be a rainy season, not a rainy season? This guy, typical Jew, thinks, ooh, I can make money off this discussion. And that's exactly what he does. He starts to plant crops and plan his entire agricultural business based upon the information he gleans from these two spirits telling what's going to happen in the world. Imagine that. And he becomes extremely wealthy. Extremely wealthy. Based upon this insider trading from Olam Haba, based upon that, I don't know, is that legal? Can they get you for this? What do you think? By the way, do not drive from here to a cemetery to start figuring out whether to buy Bitcoin or not, okay? That is not acceptable. But if you do, give me a call. Okay, so he hears this discussion and he goes back, but he keeps making money because they keep telling what's going to happen. By the way, that's according to the opinion that they were aware of what's happening in this world. They were concerned and were able to tell things that were going to happen in this world in the future. Fascinating Gemara. Absolutely amazing. Eventually, his wife has a conversation with one of these girls' mothers and makes a comment that wasn't so nice. And then somehow it gets back to these two girls. It's very long and convoluted, but this is what happens. And they realize, oh, someone's listening in and making money off us. And they keep their mouths shut. And that's pretty much the end of the Gemara. It's weird, I know. But I'm telling you, we're going to mention it to you. Because there's one part in the story that doesn't make any sense whatsoever, despite the fact that you go to a cemetery and can hear spirits speaking. And that is, why is he sleeping in a cemetery? You don't have any friends? Dave, my wife kicked me out again. Can I surf on your couch? Do you mind? Oh, Shlomo, I've been kicked out again. Can I stay in your home? Can you just she kicked me out. Oh, I don't know what I did. Why a cemetery? I always wondered this. Was there nowhere else? Wasn't there every Gemara talks about an inn, a hotel? He couldn't check in somewhere? What happened? He had no credit? And then a few years ago, I saw the answer. And it fits in perfectly with where we are today. Because he got into a fight with his wife. He wanted to remind himself that's not acceptable. That led him to be kicked out of his home. And so he wanted to bring tochach upon himself because there was no one else out in the middle of the night to give him rebuke for what he did. He said, this is where I'm going to end up if I carry on like this. And this is where we go. So he wanted to actually impress upon himself how bad the situation he created was. So he went to the cemetery. And the rabbis say, your Yetzer Hara is definitely diminished when a person's in a cemetery. And that's what he did. Friends, I'm not saying that's what we should do. Of course not. But at least imagine when you're about to get into a machloket, I'm just bringing my own demise. This is where I'm going to end up. Every time of my mouth to my wife and my kids and my friends and my boss and my employees, whoever it is, when I open up machloket, which starts small like the mem and ends up firm like the taf, I'm just killing myself. It's not worth it. That's the piece of the Gemara I never understood, and now I do. And really the Gemara is worth coming down just that lesson. The destructive power, my friends, of machloket. Many, many years ago, there was a woman who was childless in Yerushalayim. She married a long time. And so her husband heard about a doctor in Vienna who was an expert in infertility. This is going back a long time. This is pre-IVF, right? And so her and her husband didn't have much money. At Yerushalayim, 100 years ago, 150 years, whenever it was. So expensive, but he said, I'm going to get it together. I'm going to borrow. I'm going to beg, but we're going to go to Vienna to speak and meet this doctor. And so they went and they sat with this doctor and he was with them for days and weeks. And at the end he says, there's nothing I can do. Imagine the trip back from Vienna to Yerushalayim after all that time and that money. And she went back home. And her husband found her the next night, crying her eyes out, tears of oceans coming out of her. And he said, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the fertility doctor. He can decide whether we have a child or not. A few days later, she's doing her washing. And she hangs, as she used to do, you've seen Yerushalayim, right? They used to hang their clothing on lines outside the window. You see this? I don't know, maybe still do in some parts, I don't know. Right? I wouldn't try it in Manhattan. They'll take your clothing. But back then, Yerushalayim used to leave your stuff out, hanging, it would dry. Right? You walk down the sea, you see all these, colors, or in Yerushalayim, a lot of black and white, flapping outside people's windows. The woman next door to this woman, for some reason, was upset with her about something. She took scissors while she wasn't there, cut the lines, and all the washing that she worked so hard on came flushing down into the mud. And she had to start the whole process again. This woman said nothing, kept it to herself. That night, late at night, the story goes, there was a knock at the door. And it was this woman. And she says, I'm so sorry what I did to you, but my son has a very high fever, and my husband says it's because I did what I did to you and your washing. Please forgive me for what I did to you. And she says, absolutely. And her husband was next to her and said, what happened? Why didn't you tell me? She didn't even tell her own husband in order not to make machloket between him and the other woman's husband. Can you imagine? Now that's a level. She didn't even tell her own husband. She said, of course I forgive you 100%. All gone. Within a few weeks, at her old age, she became pregnant. She had a baby. And that baby ended up becoming Rav Shlomo Eliashiv. That is the story between one of the greatest Gedolim, whose birth came around because one woman wasn't willing to take revenge, to get angry, to cause machloket. She held back from it, and by holding back, Hashem said, I'm going to give you what you want to. If you don't bring division, I will give you unity. That is the secret, my friends, of Tisha B'Av. That is where we are. It's all about machloket, bringing shalom into our homes, into our families, at least lefachot on Shabbat, into our community. The Chafetz Chaim says, and it's a hard thing, I've mentioned before, I must say it again, that if there were only one community in world history, just one kehillah, one bet knesset, bet kenishta, that doesn't have machloket, Mashiach would be here already, and we'd all be in the third and final Beit HaMikdash in Yerushalayim. Just one. Which means, and it's an indictment, I know, For the past 3,500 years, there hasn't been one Bet Knesset that hasn't had at least some machloket in the community. It must be, otherwise we'd all be safe living together in Yerushalayim. I want to finish with something which we spoke about last night. We had a beautiful Instagram session that went live. We had hundreds of people who were listening in. And we got questions online, which I hear a lot, and that is the fear people have, not for peace or war, but for the Mashiach's arrival. I know. Fear of Mashiach. Who would have thought? It's not their fault. They just don't understand what Mashiach really is, what his mission is, what his job is, and how life is going to be improved once he comes. It's unfortunately ignorance, which unfortunately even the yeshivot are not fixing for us these days, when it comes to this topic at least. And so people are asking, do I really want Mashiach? It's nice where we are. I know we're in Galut, but I got my Starbucks, and I got my family here, I got my kids, it's not so bad. Well, maybe pre-October 7th we would have said that. As I said last night, when I walked into the Bet Knesset, and I saw everyone on the floor, and the parochet was pulled back, and the lights were dimmed, and people were sitting there talking quietly in a depressed tone, I was like, yep, just another day. Because every day since October 7th has been Tisha B'Av. Every day we've heard horrific stories. I know every year I walk in, I feel that sadness. This year I must have walked in sad because it was just another regular day we've experienced for the past few hundred days. There's no doubt about it. And so I want to say this to all those people of fear of Mashiach, F-O-M, FOM. I know many people have fear of Fleischig, like one of my daughters. Abba, do I eat the meat? Do I not eat the meat? Because I may want pizza later on. I'm like, it's 9 o'clock. You can eat pizza 1 in the morning? She's like, maybe. So forget fear of Fleischig. We got a much bigger fear. Fear of Mashiach. That's the ultimate FOMO. Oh, I just thought of that. I feel good. It's a problem. But don't be fearful. You have to want it. The Brisker Rav was present somewhere. And he was talking about Mashiach. And someone said jokingly, he's never coming. He lost it with him. He went nuts. Don't ever say that. You're letting people give up hope on the Geulah, on the Yeshua of Jewish people. Even as a joke. We say, he ain't coming. Don't let those words come out of your mouth. Say, B'ezras Hashem today. According to the Rambam, you don't believe Mashiach's coming. You've not just given up on Mashiach. You've given up on Kol HaTorah Kulo, says the Rambam. Lahalachai, says the Mishnah Torah. You've given up on everything. You have no place among the Jewish people and no place. The people today say they don't understand. They're not doing it through education. They're saying through ignorance. But I want to give you a mashal. We'll finish with this. Imagine a woman is pregnant and she has twins inside her. And the twins start to have an argument. One twin, like Yaakov and Esav. One twin says, I can't wait to get out of here. Oh my goodness, can you imagine how much fun we're going to do? The other one says, get out of here. We're not going anywhere. We have everything we need here. We're warm. We're floating around. There's no bills. There's no challenges. We got food coming in through this cord. I want sushi. I push. Sushi comes in. Right, I want a sandwich. I push. Sandwich comes in. It's all being piped in on this bungee cord. This is amazing. It's like a sports arena and a restaurant popped into one. Most amazing thing. Uber Eats. Oh, very good. Rabbi Fahi. Uber Eats. Uber is a fetus. Okay, very good. I wish I would have thought of that joke now. I feel upset. Uber Eats, exactly. And you're like, I'm not going anywhere. I have everything I want. And the other one says, you foolish, foolish child. There's a whole world out there. My friends, right now we're in the womb. And it's comfortable. And we get what we want. And we enjoy it. And that's okay. I do too. But are we so short-sighted to realize there's a whole world out there? Which is so much better. and so much more exciting. And so Hashem says, fine. You don't want to get out? I'm going to start the contractions. Chevlei HaMashiach. The contractions. And starts to squeeze and push until it becomes unbearable. That's where we are. Right now, my friends, in Jewish history, we are living 1,000% in the pre-Messianic era, and the contractions are getting harder and harder. And we're like, Ribono Shel Olam, Hashem is like, I'm just telling you, this is not where you're meant to be. You have a bigger place and a bigger life that you can live, and it's outside. And God willing, we're going to be seeing it soon. B'ezrat Hashem. May Hashem bless us all with a speedy delivery from our enemies, with a speedy peace, real shalom that starts on Shabbat and spreads out the entire week. And God willing, we'll see the end of all machloket from outside our communities and from inside our communities. And B'ezrat Hashem go back to Yerushalayim with Mashiach and the Beit HaMikdash. B'mehera, b'yameinu, amen. Okay, you need this.